I sat in CEO Jonathan's mahogany paneled office as young CTO Tyler Morrison smugly dismissed 15 years of my foundational code as complete garbage and fired me on the spot. My hands remained steady as I calmly pulled out a manila folder from my briefcase, sliding it across his polished desk with deliberate precision. Actually, Tyler, I suggest you read paragraph 7 very carefully. His confident smirk began dissolving as he scanned the document, his face draining of all color like someone had pulled a plug. I turned to the stunned CEO and delivered the bombshell that would change everything. Sir Tyler doesn't work for us anymore. He just terminated our license agreement. I own this technology. The silence in that corner office felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows downtown Chicago bustled with afternoon traffic, completely oblivious to the corporate earthquake happening 40 stories above the street. Tyler's hands trembled slightly as he continued reading, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. 12 years earlier, I had walked into DataFlow Solutions as a fresh-faced junior developer straight out of Carnegie Mellon University. The company occupied 3 cramped rooms above Mario's Pizza on West Division Street, and the whole place smelled permanently of pepperoni and desperation. Jonathan Webb, a former IBM executive in his late 50s with graying temples and worry lines etched deep around his eyes, had founded the startup with nothing but determination and a maxed-out credit card. "We need custom inventory management software for manufacturing clients," he had explained during my interview, gesturing at whiteboard sketches that covered every available wall surface. "Something that can handle real-time production schedules, supply chain logistics, and quality control metrics, all in one integrated system." The challenge excited me more than any six-figure salary could have. Growing up in small-town Ohio, I had watched my father work double shifts as a factory foreman, constantly frustrated by outdated computer systems that crashed during critical production runs. Here was my chance to build something that could actually help people like him. Those first 18 months tested every limit of human endurance I thought I possessed. I slept on the office couch more nights than I went home to my studio apartment. My diet consisted primarily of energy drinks, vending machine sandwiches, and whatever leftover pizza the guys downstairs were willing to share. Patricia, our sales director, would find me at my desk at 6 in the morning, still wearing yesterday's clothes, fingers flying across my keyboard as I debugged another module. The original team included 2 other developers who quit within 6 months, claiming the workload was impossible and the timeline unrealistic. They weren't wrong about either assessment, but something drove me to keep pushing forward when common sense suggested retreat. Maybe it was stubborn Midwestern work ethic, or maybe I simply refused to let my first real opportunity end in failure. My breakthrough came during a particularly brutal week when I realized traditional software architecture wouldn't work for manufacturing environments. These weren't office workers who could restart their computers when something froze. Assembly lines worth millions of dollars depended on split-second timing and absolute reliability. I started designing a modular system that could adapt to any manufacturing workflow while maintaining rock-solid stability. The coding consumed my entire existence. I missed my sister's wedding because I was debugging a critical module that controlled inventory rotation schedules. My boyfriend David left after I canceled our 4th consecutive date to fix a client emergency. "You love that computer more than me," he said, and I couldn't honestly argue the point. But then Precision Industries, an automotive parts manufacturer in Detroit, agreed to test our system. Their production manager, a skeptical engineer named Robert, had seen dozens of software implementations fail spectacularly. "Show me something that actually works in real conditions," he challenged, "not some demo that falls apart under pressure." 3 weeks later, our software was handling their entire inventory system flawlessly. Production efficiency improved by 23% in the first month. Robert called Jonathan personally to say it was the most reliable system they had ever used. During contract negotiations, I made what everyone considered an unusual request. Instead of demanding a higher salary, I insisted on retaining intellectual property rights to my core algorithms in exchange for below market compensation. Jonathan's lawyer, a sharp eyed woman named Catherine, warned me that most developers simply assigned everything to their employers. I built this from scratch, I explained. If the company succeeds, I want to benefit beyond just a paycheck. But if something goes wrong, I need to protect my work. Jonathan seemed touched by my faith in the company's future and agreed to the arrangement. We shook hands in his cluttered office while Catherine drafted language granting DataFlow an exclusive license to use my technology rather than outright ownership. By year's end, we had landed 6 major manufacturing clients. My software became the backbone of their operations, processing thousands of transactions daily without a single critical failure. I finally moved into a decent apartment and bought a reliable car. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that factories across America were running more efficiently because of code I had written. Little did I know that the very contract terms I had negotiated to protect my interests would someday become the weapon that saved my career from corporate politics and technical arrogance. The next 5 years transformed DataFlow from a struggling startup into a $50 million success story. Our client roster grew to include major players across American manufacturing: Ford supplier networks, Boeing contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and electronics manufacturers from Silicon Valley to North Carolina. My software powered operations in over 300 facilities handling millions of transactions daily while maintaining the reliability that had made our reputation. I evolved from exhausted junior developer into senior systems architect, leading a team of 8 brilliant engineers. We occupied an entire floor of a gleaming office tower in downtown Chicago, complete with a state-of-the-art server room and testing lab. The cramped rooms above Mario's Pizza became a fond memory we shared during company holiday parties. My role expanded beyond pure coding to include mentoring younger developers, consulting with clients on complex integration challenges, and speaking at industry conferences. Software Development Magazine featured me in their Rising Stars issue, highlighting how my architectural innovations were revolutionizing manufacturing technology. The recognition felt wonderful, but I stayed focused on continuous improvement rather than resting on past achievements. The technical challenges never stopped evolving. Manufacturing clients demanded features I had never imagined: integration with robotic assembly systems, real-time analysis of quality control metrics, predictive maintenance algorithms that could prevent equipment failures before they happened. Each new requirement pushed my architecture to expand while maintaining the stability that clients depended on. Personally, this period brought the work-life balance I had sacrificed during the startup years. I finally took vacations, rekindled friendships that had suffered during my coding marathon, and even started dating again. With my increased income, I was able to buy my parents a comfortable house in Ohio, replacing the cramped rental where my father had worried about factory layoffs for decades. But success attracted attention from executives who viewed technology differently than I did. David Kumar joined as VP of Engineering after leaving Google, bringing impressive credentials and modern development methodologies. Initially, he seemed supportive of my work, praising the architectural decisions that had enabled such rapid scaling. Amanda Mitchell arrived as marketing director, armed with an MBA from Wharton and aggressive growth strategies. She immediately began questioning whether our legacy systems could support the exponential expansion she envisioned. During team meetings, she would reference technical debt in my foundational code, suggesting that older architecture inherently limited future possibilities. Board member Harrison Phillips, a venture capitalist from Sand Hill Road, pushed constantly for modernization and eventual acquisition. His quarterly presentations emphasized how outdated technology could decrease company valuation, regardless of its actual performance. He spoke about attracting younger talent who expected to work with cutting-edge frameworks rather than obsolete systems. The warning signs started subtly. Conversations would stop when I entered conference rooms. Executive meetings were rescheduled without including me despite covering architectural decisions. External consultants were hired to evaluate system architecture without consulting the person who had designed and maintained it for 7 years. Jonathan, who had been my champion and friend, became increasingly distant. He started delegating technical decisions to David rather than discussing them directly with me. When I raised concerns about proposals that could destabilize proven systems, he would nod politely, but defer to newer executives who spoke in buzzwords about digital transformation and cloud-native solutions. The breaking point came during our annual holiday party at the Palmer House Hotel. I was chatting with longtime clients near the bar when I overheard Amanda talking to Harrison near the dessert table. Her voice carried more than she probably intended. The board's absolutely right about transitioning away from dependency on legacy developers, she was saying, gesturing with her champagne glass. We need someone who can clean house and build architecture that attracts acquisition interest. I've already identified several CTO candidates who specialize in modernization. Harrison nodded approvingly. The sooner the better. Investors get nervous about companies too dependent on single points of failure, especially older developers who might resist necessary changes. My stomach dropped as their meaning became clear. Despite 7 years of proven success, growing revenue, and satisfied clients, I was being categorized as a liability rather than an asset. The technology I had poured my heart into was being dismissed as outdated simply because it wasn't built with the latest trendy frameworks. Walking home through Chicago's winter streets, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Everything I had worked to build was about to face systematic dismantling by people who valued perception over performance. Tyler Morrison arrived 3 months later like a tornado wrapped in designer suits and Silicon Valley confidence. At 32, he carried credentials that impressed everyone in the C-suite Stanford computer science degree, senior architect roles at 2 unicorn startups, and a presentation style that made everything sound revolutionary. His introductory all-hands meeting filled our main conference room with buzzwords and grandiose promises. Standing before a wall-mounted screen displaying architectural diagrams that looked like abstract art, Tyler painted my 12 years of work as a monolithic legacy nightmare that was fundamentally incompatible with modern scalability requirements. Manufacturing is entering the fourth industrial revolution, he declared, clicking through slides that showed microservices architecture, containerized deployments, and cloud-native solutions. Our clients deserve 21st century technology, not systems built with frameworks from the previous decade. The irony wasn't lost on me that those previous decade systems were currently processing over 10 million transactions daily across 3 continents without significant downtime. But Tyler's confidence was infectious. Even longtime team members who had worked directly with my architecture began nodding enthusiastically at his promises of 6-month timeline for complete modernization. His hiring spree began immediately. Young developers arrived weekly from Silicon Valley, each one eager to implement the latest technologies regardless of whether they solved actual client problems. Tyler established his own architectural team, systematically excluding me from decisions about systems I had originally designed. The first major confrontation came during a client presentation to Precision Industries, the automotive parts manufacturer that had been our inaugural success story. Robert, their production manager, raised concerns about Tyler's proposed timeline for migrating their mission-critical inventory systems. Our assembly lines run 24 hours a day, Robert explained. Any downtime costs us approximately $50,000 per hour. Your modernization plan seems to require extensive system outages for data migration. Tyler waved dismissively. Modern architecture eliminates those concerns through blue-green deployments and seamless failover capabilities. Legacy monolithic systems create artificial dependencies that microservices architecture completely resolves. I watched Robert's expression shift from confusion to concern. In 12 years of industrial software development, I had learned that manufacturing engineers care more about proven reliability than theoretical capabilities. Tyler's response demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of operational requirements. Actually, I interjected, our current architecture already handles failover automatically. The client's concern about downtime is valid because their legacy manufacturing equipment requires specific communication protocols that might not be compatible with containerized deployments. Tyler's jaw tightened. Sasha, I appreciate your historical perspective, but modern engineering principles have evolved beyond outdated approaches. These gentlemen deserve solutions that leverage contemporary best practices. The meeting ended with Precision Industries requesting additional technical documentation before committing to any architectural changes. Walking back to our offices, Tyler pulled me aside with barely concealed irritation. I need you to understand that my job is to modernize this company's technology stack, he said. Constantly undermining new initiatives with obsolete concerns doesn't serve anyone's interests. Over the following weeks, Tyler's campaign against my involvement intensified. He implemented agile methodology with daily stand-ups where my long-term architectural perspective was dismissed as waterfall thinking. He restructured team responsibilities, assigning me to documentation and knowledge transfer rather than active development. Email threads began excluding me from architectural discussions I had previously led. When I attempted to raise technical concerns through proper channels, Tyler would forward my messages to executives with comments about resistance to change and inability to adapt to modern practices. The most painful part was watching my own team members distance themselves. Developers who had worked with me for years began avoiding eye contact in hallways. During team lunches, conversations would become awkward when I approached tables where Tyler's new hires were discussing architectural decisions. Sarah, a talented junior developer I had mentored for 3 years, finally explained the impossible position everyone faced. I'm sorry, Sasha, she whispered during a brief encounter in the supply room. Tyler made it clear that supporting old approaches could affect performance reviews. I have student loans and can't risk my career. Late one evening, I stayed in the office reviewing documentation when Jonathan appeared at my desk. His face looked haggard, aged beyond his 61 years by the stress of managing competing personalities and board expectations. This isn't easy for anyone, he said quietly. The board believes modernization is necessary for long-term growth. Tyler comes highly recommended and his vision aligns with investor expectations. I looked up from my computer screen. Jonathan, you've seen the performance metrics. Our systems handle more transaction volume than most Fortune 500 companies. Why fix something that isn't broken? He shifted uncomfortably. Because Harrison and the other board members worry that outdated technology makes us vulnerable to competitive disruption. They want architecture that looks attractive to potential acquirers. The conversation revealed the real motivation behind Tyler's hiring. Technical excellence mattered less than perception among investors who evaluated companies based on trendy technology rather than actual performance. My proven track record meant nothing compared to Tyler's ability to speak their language. A week later, Tyler announced to the entire engineering team that all legacy code would be deprecated within 3 months. Developers would need to prove their value by contributing to the new architecture or face reassignment to maintenance roles, with limited career advancement opportunities. Standing in that conference room listening to my life's work being casually dismissed as obsolete baggage, I felt something harden inside my chest. The naive developer who had trusted handshake agreements and assumed competence would be recognized was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that corporate politics could destroy years of dedication in a matter of months. That night, I went home and dug through my personal files until I found the folder containing my original employment contract and subsequent amendments. Reading through Catherine's carefully crafted language, I began to see possibilities that Tyler's arrogance had blinded him to completely. Tyler's campaign to eliminate my influence, accelerated with military precision over the following months. He restructured our development processes around agile ceremonies that effectively silenced anyone who raised concerns about long-term stability. Sprint planning meetings became forums where my architectural experience was reframed as waterfall resistance that threatened team velocity. The new team structure positioned Tyler as the sole decision maker for all architectural choices. Senior developers who had worked with me for years suddenly reported to team leads hired from his previous companies. My role was systematically reduced to creating documentation for systems I would no longer be allowed to maintain. Tyler's tactical approach was devastatingly effective. He scheduled critical system migrations during weeks when I had planned vacation, ensuring that any problems would be attributed to inadequate knowledge transfer rather than poor planning. When I attempted to reschedule time off to provide support, he cited company policies about honoring approved vacation requests. The external consultants he brought in validated every modernization recommendation he made. Their reports consistently criticized architectural decisions that had enabled 7 years of stable growth using language that made time-tested solutions sound like dangerous liabilities. Monolithic dependencies create unacceptable single points of failure. Their executive summary concluded, despite our systems maintaining 99.9% uptime, problems began emerging almost immediately as Tyler's team started modifying core modules. Metalworks Manufacturing reported data synchronization issues between their inventory system and production scheduling software. The errors occurred sporadically, making them difficult to reproduce in testing environments, but devastating when they disrupted assembly line operations. Performance degradation became noticeable across multiple client installations, as Tyler's microservices architecture introduced network overhead that my original design had specifically avoided. Manufacturing environments couldn't tolerate the millisecond delays that were acceptable in web applications. Assembly line controllers required instantaneous responses that the new distributed systems couldn't consistently provide. Security vulnerabilities appeared as junior developers, unfamiliar with industrial computing requirements, implemented authentication mechanisms designed for consumer applications rather than manufacturing networks. The gaps were subtle, but potentially catastrophic, if exploited by someone who understood operational technology systems. Integration failures multiplied as Tyler's team tried to modernize interfaces with legacy manufacturing equipment that couldn't be easily upgraded. 15-year-old programmable logic controllers didn't support the API standards that Tyler's architecture required, but replacing them would cost clients millions of dollars in downtime and equipment purchases. I documented every technical issue and client complaint in detailed reports that I submitted through proper channels. Each submission was acknowledged politely and then buried in committee reviews that never seemed to reach conclusions. When I attempted to escalate concerns about client satisfaction, Tyler would characterize my warnings as attempts to sabotage modernization efforts. "Sasha seems determined to prove that change is impossible," he told Jonathan during a meeting I accidentally overheard. "Her resistance to new approaches is becoming a serious impediment to progress." The personal toll was devastating. Team members I had hired and mentored began avoiding me in hallways, clearly uncomfortable with associating with someone who had been marked for elimination. Lunch invitations stopped coming. Project meetings were rescheduled without notification. I found myself eating alone in my office while listening to laughter from conference rooms where architectural decisions were being made without my input. My father called from Ohio with concerns about rumors he was hearing from friends who worked at factories using software similar to ours. "Some guys at the plant are worried about computer problems affecting production schedules," he said. "Is everything all right with your company?" Former team members began reaching out privately to apologize for distancing themselves. "I hate what's happening," Sarah texted late one evening, but Tyler made it clear that supporting your approaches could affect our careers. "I have student loans I can't afford to lose." During this period of professional isolation, I spent evenings reviewing my original employment contract with new intensity. Catherine's legal language had created something more sophisticated than I initially understood. The intellectual property clause wasn't just about attribution or credit. It established a licensing relationship between DataFlow and me that carried specific obligations on both sides. The agreement granted DataFlow an exclusive license to use my algorithms and architectural innovations, but ownership of the intellectual property remained with me. More importantly, the licensing terms included provisions about good faith cooperation and mutual benefit that Tyler's hostile approach was systematically violating. As I studied patent filings and intellectual property law, the strategic implications became clearer. The core algorithms that powered DataFlow's success weren't just code that could be easily replaced. They represented novel approaches to real-time manufacturing optimization that I had developed through years of field experience and client feedback. Tyler's modernization efforts were essentially building expensive wrapper systems around my foundational algorithms. His microservices architecture might look impressive in architectural diagrams, but it still depended on my optimization routines for the mathematical calculations that made manufacturing scheduling possible. The realization was both empowering and terrifying. I held more leverage than anyone in the company understood, including myself until that moment. But using that leverage would mean escalating a conflict that could destroy relationships I had spent years building. The decision was made for me during a client presentation that became the final straw. Precision Industries had requested an emergency meeting to discuss ongoing system instability that was affecting their production schedules. Robert, their production manager, flew to Chicago specifically to express concerns about reliability problems that had emerged since Tyler's modernization began. Our overnight production runs have experienced 3 separate failures in the past 2 weeks. Robert explained to the assembled group that included Tyler, Jonathan, and several board members. Each incident required manual intervention and cost us approximately 12 hours of lost productivity. Tyler's response was both dismissive and accusatory. These isolated incidents reflect the inherent instability of legacy architecture that we're working diligently to replace. Unfortunately, certain team members have been resistant to necessary modernization efforts, which has slowed our timeline for delivering more reliable solutions. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. Tyler was blaming me for problems caused by his architectural changes, while positioning himself as the solution to issues he had created. Robert looked confused since he had worked directly with my systems for years without experiencing such problems. Actually, I interjected. The failures correlate directly with modifications made to our inventory optimization modules. The original architecture included safeguards against the exact problems you were experiencing. Tyler's face flushed with anger. That's exactly the kind of resistance to progress that's preventing this company from achieving its full potential. We're trying to bring professional-grade modern architecture to replace amateur legacy code that's become a liability. The word amateur hung in the air like a slap. After 12 years of proven success, Tyler had publicly dismissed my expertise in front of major clients and board members. The insult was calculated to humiliate and demean, designed to establish his authority by destroying my credibility. But Tyler's arrogance had also created an opportunity. His public characterization of my work as amateur legacy code and his promise to replace it with professional modern architecture would soon collide with legal realities he had never bothered to investigate. 3 manufacturing plants experienced simultaneous system failures that evening, each one traced to conflicts between Tyler's new code and my original optimization algorithms. The irony was perfect. His attempt to eliminate my amateur contributions had proven how essential they actually were. The emergency meeting convened at 8 o'clock the following morning in Jonathan's corner office. Tyler had called it ostensibly to address the previous night's system failures, but his real agenda became clear within minutes. Board member Harrison Phillips, participated via video conference from Silicon Valley, his stern expression filling the wall-mounted monitor like a corporate judge. Legal counsel Sandra Martinez sat rigidly in one of the leather chairs, her notepad ready to document what everyone assumed would be a routine termination meeting. Tyler had spent the weekend building a narrative that blamed the cascading failures on my alleged sabotage of modernization efforts. The evidence is undeniable, Tyler declared, spreading printed reports across Jonathan's mahogany conference table. Sasha deliberately withheld cooperation during the migration process, refused to provide adequate documentation for the legacy modules, and actively undermined team morale through constant criticism of proven modern approaches. His presentation was masterfully constructed to deflect responsibility while appearing reasonable and professional. Screenshots of email conversations were selectively edited to make my technical concerns appear obstructive. Performance metrics were cherry-picked to suggest that problems existed before his arrival rather than emerging afterward. The system failures last night prove that legacy architecture has become fundamentally unsustainable. Tyler continued, continuing to depend on outdated approaches puts every client relationship at risk. For the safety of our operations and the protection of our reputation, I recommend immediate termination. Jonathan looked physically ill as Tyler spoke. 12 years of friendship and professional partnership were being sacrificed on the altar of board expectations and investor perceptions. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the fabricated evidence that Tyler had assembled with such convincing detail. Sasha, Jonathan said quietly, I'm sorry it's come to this. The board has made it clear that technical leadership changes are necessary for the company's future. Your contributions over the years have been valuable, but we need to move in a different direction. Harrison's voice crackled through the video conference speakers. This decision reflects our fiduciary responsibility to shareholders and clients. Continuing employment arrangements that threaten operational stability would be negligent. Sandra, the legal counsel, cleared her throat and began reading from prepared termination documents. Effective immediately, your employment with DataFlow Solutions is terminated for cause, specifically failure to cooperate with authorized architectural changes and conduct detrimental to team collaboration. The room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and distant traffic sounds from the streets below. Tyler leaned back in his chair with barely concealed satisfaction, believing he had successfully eliminated the last obstacle to his complete control over DataFlow's technical direction. Instead of arguing or defending myself, I calmly reached into my briefcase and withdrew the manila folder I had prepared for this exact moment. The thick legal documents inside represented 12 years of careful contract negotiations and intellectual property protection that Tyler had never bothered to investigate. I accept the employment termination without dispute, I said, sliding the folder across the polished table toward Tyler. However, I suggest you read paragraph 7 of my original licensing agreement before making any additional changes to company architecture. Tyler's confident smirk wavered as he opened the folder and began scanning the legal language that Catherine had crafted so carefully years earlier. His face gradually drained of color as the implications became clear. Sandra leaned over to read the documents, her professional composure cracking as she recognized the significance of what Tyler was seeing. This agreement grants DataFlow an exclusive license to use my algorithms and architectural innovations, I explained calmly. It does not transfer ownership of the intellectual property. The licensing terms include specific provisions about good faith cooperation and mutual benefit. Tyler's hands visibly trembled as he continued reading. What does this mean exactly? He asked, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching panic. It means that hostile termination violates the good faith cooperation clause and automatically triggers a license review process, I replied. DataFlow's right to use my technology depends on maintaining proper licensing agreements, which employment termination has just canceled. The silence in the room became deafening as everyone processed the implications. Sandra frantically flipped through her own files, searching for documentation about intellectual property assignments that apparently didn't exist. Jonathan's face had gone pale as he began calculating the potential consequences. 90% of DataFlow's core functionality depends on optimization algorithms that I developed and own. I continued. Your modernization efforts have been building wrapper systems around my foundational intellectual property. Without proper licensing continuation, you'll need to rebuild everything from scratch. Harrison's voice from the video screen sounded strained. How is this possible? Don't we own the technology our employees develop? Sandra looked up from her frantic document review. The original employment agreement specifically retained intellectual property rights for Miss Thompson in exchange for below-market compensation. It's unusual, but legally valid. Tyler finally found his voice, though it cracked slightly. But you can't just take away technology the company depends on. We have clients, obligations, ongoing operations. I smiled for the first time in months. You're absolutely right, Tyler. Discontinuing critical business operations would be devastating for everyone involved. That's why the licensing agreement includes provisions for renegotiation under changed circumstances. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. Minutes earlier, I had been a terminated employee facing professional ruin. Now I sat across from executives who were beginning to understand that their entire business model depended on technology they didn't actually own. There's more, I added, enjoying the growing panic in Tyler's eyes. The hostile termination and your public characterization of my work as amateur legacy code has freed me from non-compete obligations that were part of the original licensing terms. 3 competitors have already approached me with partnership offers. Jonathan leaned forward desperately. Sasha, surely we can work something out. This company has been your life's work too. Actually, Jonathan, my life's work is the technology itself, I replied. DataFlow was just one possible implementation. Manufacturing Tech Solutions has offered $12 million for my intellectual property portfolio, and TechFlow wants to hire me as Chief Technical Officer with equity participation. Tyler looked like he was about to be sick. His grand modernization project had not only failed to improve anything it had created, an existential crisis that threatened the company's survival. The amateur legacy code he had dismissed so contemptuously turned out to be the foundation that everything else depended on. The meeting that was supposed to eliminate me as an obstacle had instead revealed that Tyler's understanding of the company's technical infrastructure was fundamentally flawed. His Silicon Valley credentials and buzzword-heavy presentations couldn't solve a crisis that his own arrogance had created. What do you want? Harrison asked bluntly from the video screen. I gathered my documents and stood up slowly, savoring the moment of complete reversal. Right now, I want to go home and consider my options. Tyler's termination decision has created some interesting new possibilities that I need to evaluate carefully. Walking toward the office door, I paused and looked back at Tyler, who sat frozen in his chair like someone who had just realized he was standing in a minefield. Oh, and Tyler, I said sweetly, you might want to stop making changes to the core optimization modules. Without proper licensing agreements, further modifications could constitute intellectual property theft. My attorney will be in touch with details. The door closed behind me with a soft click, leaving behind the wreckage of Tyler's career and the chaos he had created through ignorance and arrogance. Within 6 hours of my revelation, DataFlow's executive leadership was in full crisis mode. Tyler's modernization project collapsed under scrutiny as the true scope of the licensing crisis became undeniable. The confident Silicon Valley executive who had dismissed my expertise that morning was now frantically trying to understand technology he had never bothered to investigate. Sandra Martinez worked through the night reviewing every contract and patent filing related to my intellectual property. Her findings confirmed my position completely. DataFlow held licensing rights, not ownership, and Tyler's hostile termination had violated multiple clauses that governed the agreement. emergency legal consultations with intellectual property specialists validated that my patents covered novel approaches to manufacturing optimization that would be extremely difficult to replicate. Jonathan called an emergency board meeting for 7 o'clock that evening. Harrison Phillips flew from San Francisco specifically to address what he now recognized as an existential threat to company valuation. Other board members participated via secure video conference, their faces grim as they absorbed reports about potential legal and financial consequences. Tyler's desperate attempts at damage control only made the situation worse. He claimed that he could rebuild core functionality without my algorithms, but technical assessment proved this impossible within any reasonable timeframe. Manufacturing optimization required years of field experience and client feedback that couldn't be replicated through theoretical knowledge alone. The mathematical models underlying our scheduling algorithms reflect proprietary innovations that took 7 years to perfect, Sandra explained to the board. Ms. Thompson's patents cover specific approaches to real-time inventory optimization that are integral to our competitive advantage. Operations Director Mike Stevens fielded increasingly frantic calls from major clients who were experiencing ongoing system instability. Precision Industries threatened immediate contract cancellation unless reliability issues were resolved within 48 hours. 2 pharmaceutical manufacturers issued formal complaints about production delays caused by software failures. Stock price volatility began as news of leadership changes leaked to industry publications. Manufacturing Technology Weekly reported that DataFlow's founding architect had left the company under unclear circumstances, sparking speculation about technical difficulties and executive turnover. Share value dropped 28% in after-hours trading as institutional investors sold positions. Tyler's background came under belated scrutiny as board members demanded explanations for how the crisis had developed. Research that should have been conducted before hiring revealed that he had been terminated from his previous startup for attempting a similar hostile takeover of the founding technical team. References that seemed impressive were actually from colleagues who had benefited from his departure. Why wasn't this information discovered during the hiring process? Harrison demanded during the emergency session. The candidate came highly recommended by executive search consultants, Jonathan replied weakly. His technical presentations were compelling and his Stanford credentials seemed impressive. His credentials don't matter if he doesn't understand the business he's supposed to manage. Board member Angela Foster interjected from her video connection. This situation represents exactly the kind of operational risk we're supposed to prevent through proper due diligence. Meanwhile, my leverage continued growing as competitors recognized the opportunity Tyler's incompetence had created. Manufacturing Tech Solutions increased their acquisition offer to $15 million after reviewing my patent portfolio in detail. DataFlow's CEO called personally to discuss equity partnership arrangements that would value my intellectual property significantly higher than my DataFlow salary had ever reflected. Industry colleagues rallied support as word spread about Tyler's behavior. Former clients wrote testimonial letters praising my technical competence and professional integrity. Conference organizers invited me to speak about intellectual property protection for technical professionals. The narrative was shifting from legacy developer resisting change to pioneering architect standing up to corporate bullying. Sarah and 3 other longtime team members submitted resignations citing concerns about company stability and management competence. Their departure letters specifically mentioned feeling misled about Tyler's qualifications and uncomfortable with the treatment of respected colleagues. I came to DataFlow because of the technical excellence and collaborative culture that Sasha created. Sarah wrote in her resignation, "The current leadership approach represents everything I wanted to avoid in corporate technology environments." Client satisfaction surveys revealed systematic deterioration in support quality and system responsiveness since Tyler's arrival. Manufacturing efficiency reports showed productivity declines averaging 15% across installations where his architectural changes had been implemented. The evidence contradicted every claim he had made about modernization benefits. Independent security audits commissioned by nervous clients discovered vulnerabilities that Tyler's junior developers had introduced through inexperience with industrial computing requirements. The findings validated my warnings about authentication mechanisms designed for consumer applications rather than manufacturing networks. Tyler's Silicon Valley team began fragmenting as the scope of the crisis became apparent. Two senior developers he had recruited returned to previous employers, unwilling to stake their reputations on a project that was clearly failing. Others distanced themselves from architectural decisions they now realized were fundamentally flawed. "I thought we were modernizing outdated systems," one departing developer confided. "Nobody mentioned that we were trying to replace the company's core intellectual property without understanding what it actually did." Jonathan faced the impossible position of choosing between protecting Tyler's ego and saving the company from bankruptcy. Investor pressure was mounting for immediate action to resolve the leadership crisis. Client relationships were deteriorating daily as system problems multiplied. Stock value continued declining as market confidence evaporated. The final straw came when Precision Industries' legal team issued formal notice of contract breach demanding compensation for production losses caused by software failures. Their documentation traced every problem directly to modifications Tyler's team had made to systems that had operated reliably for years. "We trusted DataFlow because of their proven track record," Robert, their production manager, explained in his termination letter. "The recent changes have created unacceptable operational risks that we can't afford to tolerate." Tyler's last desperate gambit was attempting to negotiate directly with me, bypassing board oversight in hopes of arranging a private settlement. He called my personal phone at 10:30 that evening, his voice strained with exhaustion and barely controlled panic. "Sasha, we need to talk about resolving this situation professionally," he said. "I may have made some communication errors, but we're all adults here. Surely we can find common ground." "Communication errors," I replied calmly. "You publicly called my work amateur legacy code and fired me for alleged sabotage. That seems more intentional than accidental." "Look, I was under pressure to show quick results," he admitted. "Maybe I moved too fast without fully understanding the existing architecture, but destroying the company won't benefit anyone." The irony was perfect. The same arrogance that had led Tyler to dismiss my expertise without investigation was now forcing him to beg for cooperation from someone he had treated it with contempt. "Tyler, you're right that destroying DataFlow wouldn't benefit anyone," I agreed. "But you've already done that damage through incompetence and ego. I'm just deciding whether to help clean up your mess or pursue more attractive opportunities elsewhere." The call ended with Tyler understanding that his position had become completely untenable. Within 24 hours, the board would have no choice but to address the leadership crisis he had created through his own arrogance and ignorance. The emergency board meeting that sealed Tyler's fate began at 6 o'clock the following morning. Harrison Phillips had flown back from California overnight, and the other board members appeared via secure video conference with expressions that left no doubt about the agenda. Jonathan looked exhausted, aged years, by the stress of managing a crisis that threatened everything he had built. Tyler entered the conference room with the desperate confidence of someone hoping to argue his way out of inevitable consequences. His prepared presentation blamed external factors and unrealistic expectations for problems that were clearly caused by his own incompetence and arrogance. "The challenges we're facing reflect the inherent difficulties of modernizing legacy systems." He began clicking through slides that deflected responsibility while proposing expensive solutions. "With additional resources and timeline adjustments, we can overcome these temporary setbacks." Harrison interrupted before Tyler could finish his second slide. "The board has completed a comprehensive review of recent events. Your mismanagement of technical assets and personnel has created an existential threat to company operations. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated for cause. The unanimous vote took less than 5 minutes. Board members cited fraudulent representation of qualifications, destruction of client relationships, and creation of unnecessary legal liabilities as grounds for immediate dismissal. Tyler's corporate credit cards were canceled, his access to company systems revoked, and security was instructed to escort him from the building. Furthermore, Angela Foster added via video conference, the company reserves the right to pursue legal action for damages caused by your misrepresentations during the hiring process. Tyler's departure was swift and ignominious. The confident executive who had arrived 8 months earlier promising revolutionary improvements left carrying a cardboard box containing personal items, his Silicon Valley network already distancing themselves from someone whose incompetence had become industry gossip. Within hours of Tyler's termination, Jonathan called to request an emergency meeting. We convened in a neutral location, the quiet corner of a downtown coffee shop where we had once celebrated DataFlow's early victories. His face showed the strain of nearly losing everything he had worked to build. I owe you more apologies than I can express, he began. I allowed board pressure and investor expectations to override my judgment about people I trusted. Tyler's credentials impressed everyone, but credentials don't replace character or competence. The negotiation that followed was both professional and personal. I held all the leverage, but destroying DataFlow would have meant eliminating something I had helped create. Instead, I proposed terms that recognize the true value of my contributions while ensuring the company's survival. My new licensing agreement included equity participation, reflecting the actual importance of my intellectual property to DataFlow's success. I would return as chief technical advisor with authority over all architectural decisions and the right to approve or reject any proposed changes to core systems. Tyler's modernization project taught everyone valuable lessons about respecting proven expertise, I explained. Future technology decisions will be made based on client needs and operational requirements, not investor perceptions or trendy buzzwords. The terms also required Tyler to make a public statement acknowledging his errors and apologizing for undermining company stability. His LinkedIn post, carefully crafted by DataFlow's legal team, became a case study in professional humility that his former Silicon Valley colleagues shared with dark humor. Client relationships gradually recovered as system performance returned to previous reliability standards. Precision Industries resumed their contract after receiving personal assurance that architectural changes would be managed by experienced professionals rather than ambitious newcomers. My original development team returned with enthusiasm that surprised even me. Sarah's resignation letter became a model for technical professionals protecting their careers from incompetent management. Working with Sasha again reminds me why I love software development, she said during our first team meeting after the crisis. The industry response validated everything I had believed about the importance of respecting technical expertise. Manufacturing Technology weekly featured my story as an example of how competence and integrity could triumph over corporate politics and executive arrogance. Speaking engagements multiplied as other companies sought to understand how they could avoid similar crises. My presentation on technical leadership and intellectual property protection became one of the most requested topics at industry conferences. The consulting firm I established with former DataFlow colleagues specialized in manufacturing technology, with an emphasis on stability and reliability over trendy modernization. Our first client was a competitor of Tyler's previous startup, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. DataFlow's stock price not only recovered, but reached new highs as market confidence returned with proven technical leadership. The company became a case study in successful crisis management and the importance of understanding core business assets before making leadership changes. Tyler's attempted modernization served as an industry cautionary tale about change management failures and the dangers of dismissing foundational expertise. His career never fully recovered from the DataFlow debacle, and his name became associated with executive arrogance rather than technical innovation. The most satisfying outcome was cultural transformation at DataFlow. The company developed policies, ensuring that technical decisions would be evaluated based on operational merit rather than executive preferences. Board oversight now includes technical advisors who can assess proposed changes with actual expertise rather than buzzword recognition. My relationship with Jonathan evolved from employer employee to genuine business partnership. His willingness to acknowledge mistakes and implement meaningful changes demonstrated the character that had attracted me to DataFlow originally. The licensing model I pioneered became a template for other technical professionals seeking to protect their innovations while enabling company growth. Patent attorneys began recommending similar arrangements to clients who developed core intellectual property for their employers. 3 years later, DataFlow was acquired by a Fortune 500 manufacturing conglomerate for $450 million. My equity, participation, and licensing fees provided financial security that no salary could have matched. More importantly, the acquisition validated that competence and integrity create lasting value, while arrogance and politics create temporary disruption. The young developers who had worked with Tyler learned valuable lessons about evaluating leadership based on character rather than credentials. Several joined my consulting firm where they discovered that sustainable technical excellence requires both innovation and respect for proven approaches. Looking back, Tyler's attempted coup taught everyone involved that true technical leadership combines expertise with humility, innovation with stability, and progress with respect for the foundations that enable growth. His failure became our collective success, proving that competence and integrity ultimately triumph over politics and arrogance in environments where actual results matter more than impressive presentations. The manila folder that ended Tyler's career now sits in my office as a reminder that preparation, documentation, and legal awareness provide crucial protection for technical professionals navigating corporate politics. But the real protection comes from building expertise so valuable that attempting to eliminate it only reveals its true importance. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone tried to take credit for your work or dismiss your expertise? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video if my experience resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about workplace justice, and share this with anyone who's ever felt undervalued in their professional life. Thank you for listening, and remember that your expertise and integrity are your most powerful assets in any career challenge you might face.